I'm going to take a look at using the cloning and healing tools in Lightroom and Photoshop. And these techniques can be used on a landscape type of image like this one. They can be used on images of people to remove blemishes and that sort of thing. There's a lot of different types of work you can do with these tools. Let's jump right in. First with Lightroom. Now I do want to say that Lightroom's cloning and healing tools are more limited than what you have in Photoshop. Future versions of Lightroom may change that, but with Lightroom 4 at the moment, the clone tools are a little bit less developed than they are in Photoshop. Now let's take a look. Develop module. And currently I'm in a previous process version. I'm going to reset that, which will flatten the image out a bit, but for our purposes, that's not a problem. Now, the healing tools are accessed with the spot removal button in the Develop panel. You can also press the Q key to access the tool. And the controls are pretty simple. You can do a straight clone or a heal. And the difference between the two is a clone simply copies pixels from point A to point B. A heal tries to blend the pixels into point B so they look like they belong in that spot. You can adjust the size and the opacity of the brush. Going to hold the space bar and click on a likely spot. Zoom in. Now I've got a bird here, and I can quite easily remove him with either one of the clone or the heal tools because the sky surrounding him is very plain. Now I can adjust the size by dragging the slider or using the mouse scroll wheel or using the left and right bracket keys on the keyboard. Now Lightroom automatically tries to find an area nearby to clone from or heal from. Sometimes it's not the right area, so you need to click and drag and find a different spot. Clone from point A to point B and cover up the bird. Now you can adjust these as much as you want after the fact. You can also increase the size by dragging. Now if I click and drag around looking for something to heal, I'll try this trash can. I'll first try it on clone mode to see what the difference is. This is another good piece for the clone tool. There's not much variation in the tones and details. Now this is an example where the tool didn't quite choose the right spot to clone from. If I drag down and over, I can line up pretty well. Close that, and that blends pretty nicely. I'm going to select that and delete it with the delete key, switch over to heal mode, and try that. Similar results, but there is a bit more blending done to make that work. And I can keep going on like this as much as I need to. Let's say, for example, I need to do a cross like this in multiple passes. So I can click, adjust the source, and then click another one. And this is how you remove longer objects that would benefit from a smaller brush but still need to go over a longer area. Not quite there. I need to go back and adjust a couple of those spots. But that's the general idea. And if I zoom back out to the wide view, everything is gone. I'm going to reset the image and take it into Photoshop because that's the extent of cloning and healing in Lightroom. Okay, my bird's back. Now generally when I do this in Photoshop I want it to be a smart object so I can go back and adjust settings in Lightroom after the fact. One issue you run into is you'll do these adjustments, these clone pieces on a separate layer. Now if you take it back to Lightroom for further develop work as just a smart object, if you change the tones, suddenly your spot healing pieces are a different tone. They're lighter or darker. Say the sky gets darker, but your clone pieces are still light. So it's important to do as much as you can in Lightroom before taking the piece into Photoshop. Do your tone work as much as you can, or be prepared to do further Lightroom adjustments on the layered Photoshop file. And just be aware there's certain limitations. Now, since this is a smart object, I can't directly clone onto it. I need to add a layer above the smart object. Now, if I zoom in on that, I can make my cloning adjustments and not affect the image underneath. So this is the clone stamp tool. You can also use the pattern stamp tool to overlay various patterns, but clone stamp is what we're concerned with for our spotting exercise. Now the way this tool works, you hold the Option key, choose a source, and then paint over the destination. Now right now I've made one mistake. I haven't told the tool to use all the layers. Up here at the top you have current layer, current and below, or all layers. Now in this case current and below will do just fine, but occasionally you'll have layers in the stack above your current layer and you'll need to hit all of those as well. But current and below will sample from this layer and the bottom layer. And that clones out the bird pretty easily. Now you need to pay attention where that source goes. Normally it will follow the brush. As I keep going down, the source changes from being up here to being down here. And occasionally that'll trip you up. If I uncheck the aligned option, the source will always stay where I set it initially. And it's useful to know whether or not you need to check that. Now right now I've uncovered one of those limitations of the clone tool, that it's simply copying from point A to point B, and obviously the tones are different in this portion of sky. I'm going to go into my history palette and undo those brush strokes. So that's the simple clone tool. Now I have the healing brush, and there are different options. In Photoshop CS6 you have the Content Aware Move tool. It's not in CS5, but Red Eye, Patch Tool, Healing Brush, and Spot Healing Brush are in CS5. So I'll run through those. The Spot Healing Brush works the same way that the Lightroom Healing tool does. You click on a spot, or in this case you can paint over it as well. And Photoshop will look for something surrounding to paint over. Once again, I need to hit Sample All Layers. And Photoshop finds similar textures and blends them into the point that I selected. And this tool works pretty well. Occasionally it will choose the wrong texture from the wrong area, and you'll have to undo, try it again, or switch over to the manual healing brush. And this works like the clone tool. Once again, check current and below, and I'm going to uncheck aligned. So the source will stay exactly where I put it initially. It'll stay exactly in this point. I paint down, and Photoshop fills in and blends the piece together. One thing you'll notice, and you can sort of see it here, when I clicked on this spot near this contrast edge, you get this gradient smear. And that is a side effect of the clone tool algorithm. It'll create that smear. So you have to be careful around edges. For example, to take out this tower, I click here, and if I just paint along that edge of the tree line, I'm probably going to get that smear. Now to avoid that, I can either undo and restart, or I need to choose a clone source along the contrast edge, preferably where the textures match up, and I need to paint on both edges of the contrast edge, and that gets rid of the gradient. That takes some practice, but it's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. Something else to be aware of is oftentimes people have the tendency to do a single click, which doesn't really do the job. you need to be prepared to paint on the object, even if it's a dust spot on the sky like the bird that I worked on earlier. Let's delete this layer and start fresh on it. New layer again. Nope. New layer, not a group. A single click, in this case taking 2 clicks to get rid of the bird, it's easier to just paint across in a longer stroke. And that's one of the big advantages Photoshop has over Lightroom, is that you can actually paint on the piece. And hopefully we'll see that feature in Lightroom soon, so we won't have to take the photos into Photoshop. But that moves along pretty easily. Now there's another tool here, the patch tool. And that one doesn't work on a blank layer. To use the patch tool, I have to be on the image itself, and I'm pretty sure it can't be a smart object. Right. OK, and rasterize. So now it's no longer a smart object. So when you get to the point where you need to use the patch tool, you need to really be sure you've done as much as you can in Lightroom up to this point. Now the patch tool has 2 modes, source and destination. Source works like this. I choose the piece that I want to remove and then drag its selection over to a blank texture. Whereas destination, I'll make a selection on the blank piece of texture and drag that over the object to remove. And that'll blend. And this patch tool works like the healing tool. It will try to blend the selection to make it blend in with the surrounding pieces. So Command D to unselect that, and that's the patch tool. Now let's see what else. I don't have any red eyes in this photo, so I won't use the red eye tool. We've done the clone stamp. When you're using the healing brush and clone tools, you have some various options in this clone source panel. You can rotate your source, which is handy if you need to flip something left or right to get the proper clone, or like on the tree line here, if I need to adjust the angle a little bit to make the edge blend a little bit better. So having the rotation options, it's not something you use a lot, but it's nice to have available. You can also adjust the opacity of the brush if you need to do some detail work to sort of clone something out, but sort of not clone it out. You can control opacity at the brush level, or if you're working on a separate layer, you can control the layer's opacity overall. And something I've done when doing touch-up work on portraits is I'll have a separate layer set at, say, 50% opacity. And that layer I use to get rid of blemishes but not hide them entirely, just tone them down a little bit. And then I'll have another layer at 100% opacity, which is designed to get rid of the acne and scars and that sort of thing you might find on people. And separating those 2 layers means you have better control over what needs to be semi-transparent, what needs to be fully opaque. Once I've done with my clone work, save the image. And here Lightroom defaults to a -edit.tiff file. And that shows up in Lightroom as an edited piece. The differences are subtle here, but they do exist. So that's a quick look at the cloning and healing tools and the patch tool that you find in Lightroom and Photoshop.